my top 10 favorite UFC fights of all time. Of course, later on tonight we have UFC 276, where Jared Cannonier takes on Israel Adesanya for the UFC middleweight championship of the world. But before that happens, I figured I'd take the time to do my top 10 favorite UFC fights of all time, because there's a few more new fights that have been added to the list, and that's always exciting. Now, disclaimer, I don't watch all the UFC events, at least the fight night events. I do order every pay-per-view card. I started ordering cards back in 2011. The first card I ordered was the card that was co-headlined by Matt Hughes versus Josh Koscheck, and the main event was Quinton Rampage Jackson versus John Jones. From there, I only ordered John Jones cards, and then I believe the first non-John Jones card I ordered was Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2. And then, I don't know when I started ordering all the cards. I do remember ordering Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit. I was really excited for that fight. At some point, I just started ordering them all, but I don't watch all the fight night cards. And on this list, there is going to be some recency bias. I've seen a lot of the classic fights. They're just maybe not as fresh in my memory. If there's a fight that's missing from this list, make sure you leave that down in the comments section. And I'll give a few honorable mentions of fights that could have made the list but didn't. If you're a fan of UFC or a fan of UFC fight reactions, which I'll post my reactions to some of the fights either late tonight, early into tomorrow morning, or on Monday, I'll have a few more posted. Make sure you come back to the channel for that. If you're a fan of the UFC and like anything to do with UFC, make sure you smash that like button. Sound off in the comment section about what you think of my top 10 favorite UFC fights list is. And of course, if you're a fan, make sure you hit that sub button, subscribe to the channel, join the team, and show your support. So, I do have a few honorable mentions. Now, I was specific to say favorite UFC fights of all time. There would only be one other fight that's non-UFC if I included it, and that would be from Strikeforce, Paul Daly versus Nick Diaz. That fight was a fucking war. I believe it went one round, like 1 second left in the first round, and it was back and forth. Diaz went down, Daly went down, Diaz went down, Daly went down. It was a crazy fight, and if this is a list of my top 10 favorite fights of all time, that would probably be in the top 5, but I didn't include it, but I definitely wanted to give it an honorable mention. Other fights that I really liked, I did like Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit. Maybe not as exciting in some of these fights, but it had moments where it was crazy. The very first fight between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz from UFC 202. Crazy fight for how long it lasted. That was amazing. Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua. Back and forth. Craziness. For some reason, I decided not to include that on my list this time. It has been on the list before. So those are a few fights that I really liked and enjoyed, but they just didn't quite make the list. You could count John Jones versus DC, the first and the second one. Not necessarily the best fight, but my fight where I was most focused on. I definitely like both of those fights, especially the one at UFC 214, where Jones won by the head kick, and then it later got overturned because of whatever he was supposedly on at that time. So those are fights I liked, but those didn't make my top 10. Let's start the top 10 list off with Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz at UFC 205. This was a 5-round fight. McGregor won. Upon initial reaction to this fight, I thought Diaz won the fight. Going back, watching it probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I do believe that McGregor won, but there was moments where both fighters were in trouble in this fight, and it was just fun to watch. It was a fun fight. Of course, Diaz and McGregor do a great job of promoting their fight, even if they're not the most or the best fighters per se, at least at the time. But it was a fun fight, and I really want the trilogy to that fight, just because I think that would be the best fight for both of them. McGregor's kind of not doing very well right now and recovering from that leg injury, and of course Nate Diaz hasn't won a fight since he beat Anthony Pettis, I believe. So that would be a fight I would love to see again. So that's why that's my number 10. Number 9, we have John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 165. maybe this wasn't a crazy fight in terms of Alexander Gustafsson didn't really do that many crazy moves in the fight. But the fact that he was just jabbing Jon Jones, and Jon Jones was having such a difficult time with it for at least the first I haven't watched the fight in a while, so I don't remember the exact moments of it, and I don't have any notes in front of me other than the fight that I'm talking about. I believe he was beating Jones for the first 2.5 rounds of the fight, and then Jones finally started connecting. Obviously, in the 4th round, Jones really connected and almost finished Gustafsson. And then in the 5th round, he was just head kicking the shit out of him. But it was a fun fight to watch because I didn't know if Jones was going to win or lose. And I'd never seen him do this bad in a fight. Not that he looked really that bad, but he just seemed like he didn't have it. Obviously, we heard that Jones really didn't train for the fight. So that's why Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson is my number 9. The first one. The second one was fun, too, because Jones came back and won the title. My number 8 is actually the fight that I most recently watched on this list. I've watched it more than one time. Just wanted to go back and watch it to see if this makes the list or Shogun versus Dan Henderson makes the list. And that would be Robbie Lawler versus Rory MacDonald 2 at UFC 189. Now, there were moments in the fight where it wasn't that entertaining. Like the first round, nothing crazy happened. But there were some crazy moments in this fight. Robbie Lawler messed up Rory MacDonald's nose really bad. And then in, I think it was the late 3rd round, he started going off on Robbie Lawler. And Robbie Lawler could have easily been finished at one point in this fight. But he persevered. And then he ended up hurting MacDonald's nose so bad in the 5th round that he just fell to the canvas and covered up. And John McCarthy stopped the fight. But it was a good, fun fight. And it's the fight where Robbie Lawler has his lip split right here. And I'm going to keep on coming. That's one thing about Robbie Lawler. Say what you want about Robbie Lawler, but if he's still standing, he's going to try to fight. Like the fight against Carlos Condit. I thought Condit won that fight. Even though he knocked Condit down, I know I'm talking about a different fight now. Robbie Lawler in that 5th round with like 1 minute and 30 seconds left to go went crazy on Carlos Condit. It was crazy. Robbie Lawler will keep on coming and keep on fighting. Doesn't do any of that wrestling shit. And that's why I had to put Robbie Lawler versus Rory MacDonald as my number 8. My number 7 is a new addition to my top 10 list, and that would be Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns from UFC 273. Fun fight. Would have loved to have seen it go longer. Obviously, I don't know if the guys would have been able to go any longer because they looked pretty gassed, but Chimaev, we saw some chinks to his armor in that fight. Of course, his competition wasn't that great before then. This was a very big step up in competition, but Gilbert Burns brought it. Even though he lost the fight, if you look at the statistics in the fight, it looks like he easily could have won. Now, I've watched the fight, I think, 3 times. I don't know who won. I think Chimaev won, in my opinion, because he did the most damage, although Burns clobbered him a few times. But it was just a fun fight. I didn't expect it to be that fun, but it certainly delivered, so that's why I had to put Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns as my number 7. My number 6, another new addition to the list, and this fight, honestly, could go higher, and that would be Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prohaska. What a fight. I mean, I never thought Glover Teixeira would last this long. I was happy as hell when he beat Jan Blachowicz for the light heavyweight championship. But I'm like, okay, I know Yuri Prohaska is next because he beat Dominic Reyes. But I'm like, there's no way Glover Teixeira is going to be able to withstand this maniac in the octagon. And you know what? He took a lot of Prohaska's best shots early in the fight. And persevered and kept on going and would take Prohaska down. And then you have the 5th round. This fight's back and forth, but Teixeira's winning. And he's starting to beat Prohaska on the feet. He's fucking him up with punches, but then tries to do a level change to do a takedown. I think if he keeps punching Yuri Prohaska, Glover Teixeira is still your light heavyweight champion. But in the end, after a full mount with 1 minute left to go in the fight, Prohaska somehow gets Teixeira in a crucifix type position. Teixeira gets out of that, and in the roll through, he locks in a rear naked choke with no hooks and makes Glover tap out with like 29, 28, whatever seconds left. Crazy fight. One of the most fun fights that I've watched, and I'm really, really surprised by that. Because honestly, my thought was to not order this card. But they did put Joanne Jędrzejczyk versus Zhang Weili as the third, one of the fights on the card, and I had to see that rematch. So that's why I put Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prohaska as my number 6. Gotta rest my lips here. So my number 5 is actually a fight that wasn't on any pay-per-view cards. It was Michael Johnson versus Justin Gaethje in Justin Gaethje's UFC debut at the Ultimate Fighter Finale 25. This was a crazy fight. Back and forth, Gaethje's clobbering Michael Johnson. Then all of a sudden, Michael Johnson gets the upper hand at the end of the first round. And honestly, John McCarthy probably should have stopped it. I don't know for sure. But Gaethje looked like he was in trouble, but he let it go. Then eventually, though, it was the end of the round, and Gaethje recovered and went back to leg kicking him and messing Michael Johnson up. But what a fight! And I actually moved this fight down a bit because I don't watch it enough. Even though this is one of my favorite fights of all time, it's highly entertaining, and it made me a definite fan of Justin the Highlight Gaethje because he said, "Where's my equal?" after the fight was over with him when he was doing his post-fight interview. So that's why I put Michael Johnson versus Justin Gaethje from the Tough 25 finale is my number 5. My lips are super dry right now, but I'll go through this. I'll make it through it. My number 4, like I'd mentioned, the reason why I ordered UFC 275 was for the rematch between Joanne Jędrzejczyk versus Zhang Weili, and their first fight from UFC 248. Just before the world went to shit. Well, it was about to go to shit anyway, but this was the last full attendance card for a while. Their first fight was absolutely insane. It's surprising that I've only watched this fight like 3 times, but it's crazy. When I watch it, I really don't know who wins. I thought Joanna had won the fight. But then rewatching it, I'm like, well, Zhang Weili probably won the fight, but I don't even know. It was such a good fight. These women delivered on so many levels, and for Joanne Jędrzejczyk to look the way she did after the fight was over with her forehead, that was insane. And Zhang Weili won the first fight, made a statement in the second fight. She is going to probably go through Carla Esparza, in my opinion. But that's why I had to put Joanne Jędrzejczyk versus Zhang Weili as my number 4. That's only my number 4. My number 3 is probably a fight I've watched a lot. I've probably watched this fight at least 15 times. I absolutely love it. And that would be Colby Chaos Covington versus Kamaru Usman from UFC 245. This was another card that I was thinking about not ordering, but I ordered it anyway because I was in the mindset of ordering every UFC card. And man, I'm glad I did. And I just thought of another honorable mention. I will talk about that after this fight. But Covington versus Usman, a fight of 2 wrestlers that I thought was going to be, okay, it's going to be on the ground a lot of posturing, a lot of laying on top of each other. There wasn't any of that. These guys went in the center of the octagon and battled it out for almost 5 rounds. It went 5 rounds, but ended with a finish. The finish with Usman winning the fight, you could argue that there were some illegal strikes and that Covington was holding onto his legs, trying to stand back up, just kind of waiting. Maybe Mark Goddard stopped the fight too soon. But, I mean, Usman was landing some punches, and Covington started out round 5 really good, and then all of a sudden Usman just turned the switch on and started jabbing him with some straight jabs that are just messing Covington up. But what a fight. Love or hate Colby Covington, I mean, he's done some things that had to make me change my opinion of him. Not liking him and then having him dominate Robbie Lawler like he did. That made me like him. Then this fight with Usman made me like him even more. And they just built a very fun fight. And even the second fight, which actually upon rewatch I thought was a lot better than I initially thought. What a fight that these two guys had. But that first fight, with them standing in the octagon and trading for almost the full 5 rounds, it was something. If you haven't seen Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman from UFC 245 yet, what are you doing? I've seen this fight so many times. So that's why that's my number 3. That's only my number 3. So I thought of an honorable mention. I've seen this fight, I think, twice, but it's been a long time since I've watched it. And that would, of course, be Stephan Bonner versus Forrest Griffin from the Tough Finale 1. From what I remember, while it was a fun striking battle, there was no crazy, like, this guy's about to go down, and now this guy's about to go down. So that's why on this ranking, it didn't make my list. It has before, but it's been about 4 or 5 years since that made the list. So I did want to give that. That's a big fight in the history of the UFC where they awarded Bonner and Griffin contracts. Rememberable fight, just not as good as any of these 10, in my opinion. I know a lot of you will argue with me because it's an unpopular opinion, because everybody loves that fight. They say it's their favorite fight. It's not mine. So my number 2, which used to be my number 1, was from UFC 206, and that would be Dooho Choi versus Swanson. The first round, nothing too crazy. But the second round, well, first of all, Swanson's doing these crazy cartwheel moves and flips and all these weird combinations that you shouldn't really be able to land in a fight, but he's landing them like easily on Dooho Choi. But then Dooho Choi just keeps going boom, 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 precision punching, and gets Swanson in a very bad situation and almost finishes him. But then he's able to, persevere and take Choi down. And then more crazy moves from Swanson. But these guys put on a great show. And this was actually a UFC card that I didn't order. I feel bad because I missed a crazy fight. I do believe the main event of the evening was Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo. I think I had things going on that I didn't really want to commit myself to ordering a fight. I should have, though. Obviously, I've seen the fight many times, but it would have been fun to watch live, especially when I've done it. I didn't do reactions then. The first reaction to a fight I ever did that I put on YouTube was John Jones versus Dominic Reyes from UFC 247. If I would have been doing fight reactions back then, it would have been fun to watch. But Dooho Choi versus Swanson from UFC 206 was a great fight, and if you haven't seen it yet, you need to check it out on Fight Pass or YouTube if you can find it. The full, without it zoomed in, it's a fun fight. And now we've reached my number 1, and this is a pretty recent fight. Now, maybe the fight in terms of back and forth, maybe it wasn't as back and forth as you'd like a big fight to be, but I absolutely love both of these fighters, and they put on a hell of a performance. And I'm talking about Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje from UFC 268. They started the card with this fight, the main card, and after this fight, I was spent. And the main event was Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman 2. You also had Rose Namajunas versus Zhang Weili 2. Is it Zhang Weili? Or I don't remember. Yeah, it's Zhang Weili 2. But it was a pretty awesome fight. That first round, Chandler and Gaethje are going at it. Chandler connects with a bunch of good shots in this fight, at least in the first round. And Gaethje at one point looks like he's in trouble, but he perseveres. Just some great. I mean, he's throwing everything he has into some of these shots on Chandler. And I saw Chandler throw a lot of stuff that he had on Gaethje, but this fight was crazy. And it was probably more towards Justin Gaethje in the second and third round. But just how Michael Chandler is eating some of these blows is quite impressive. And the fact that Gaethje didn't finish Chandler. Now, if he had a little bit more skills on the ground, like when Chandler went down in the second round, he could have easily got him in a choke, I think, if he wanted to. I don't know how good Justin Gaethje is at submissions, but it was there. But he let Chandler recover, and Chandler was able to get back up, which is great because I wanted to see them duke it out. But it's a fun fight, and I absolutely love it. So I'm going to recap all the fights that I talked about. Honorable mentions, Shogun Rua versus Dan Henderson. You had the one non-UFC fight that I just want to talk about, but this was a UFC-specific video. Paul Daly versus Nick Diaz. You have Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit. You had the first fight between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. And then I forget that Forrest Grissom versus Stephan Bonner from the Tough 1 finale. All great fights. Didn't quite make my top 10. McGregor versus Diaz from UFC 205 is my number 10. Jones versus Gustafsson at UFC 165 is my number 9. Robbie Lawler versus Rory MacDonald from UFC 189 is my number 8. Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns from UFC 273 is my number 7. My number 6 is Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prohaska is my number 6. My number 5 is Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson from the Tough 25 finale. My number 4 is Joanne versus Zhang Weili from UFC 248, just before everything went to shit. I think it was going to shit, but it didn't quite go to shit until right after that. My number 3 is Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman 1 from UFC 245. My throat is really mad at me right now. My number 2, Dooho Choi versus Swanson from UFC 206. And my number 1, as I just got done talking about, Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler from UFC 268. So let me know what you think. I know there's some fights that you probably are like, why didn't he mention them? Edgar versus Maynard, both those fights apparently were really good. And I've seen them. I just don't remember everything about them, and I have more of a recency bias. But if there's a fight I need to add to this list, tell me what it is. I'll go out of my way to watch it. UFC fights. Smash the like button if you're a fan of UFC, or if you like the fight reactions. I will post my reactions probably late tonight for at least one of the fights on UFC 276, and then Sunday and Monday I'll post Sunday, afternoon, night, and Monday I'll post more of my reactions, probably to 4, maybe 5 cards on the fight, the main card specifically, maybe some of the prelims. We'll see. And of course, if you're watching the video anyway, make sure you subscribe to the channel, join the team, show your damn support, and be a part of something special. And JDev will return.